Hi everyone, I'm Jeffrey and this is AutoAlchemy. I'm back at it with another typing video for the objective personality classes. Basically, the way this works is that part one of the video is me attempting to type the person in question. Part two, after I have seen their official type, I will kind of reflect and ponder on what my mistakes were, where my head was at, and yeah, just try to do some digesting of where I went wrong. So in any case, that's my preamble. I'm getting better at making it short. Today I'm looking at the comedian Rob Delaney. Sorry for making so much noise. I'm looking at Rob Delaney and don't know a ton about him. He is a comedian. He's been kind of going through it at some point in recent time. He lost his son at the age of 2 to a brain tumor. So this one I'm not feeling super optimistic about. I watched a few clips already and kind of got emotional. Not really sure what I'm thinking, not able to think that objectively about the guy, but I'm just going to jump into an arbitrary point in this video about processing grief and the loss of his son. Let's freaking get it.
Because as wonderful as every doctor was, they have their specialties that they kind of stay in, so the parent or the patient kind of assembles all the information and then makes the decision. So we were like, yeah, my wife was like, we can't, because if we do this, then even what we do might kill him. It'll absolutely hurt him, and then he'll die anyway. And so I was like, well, couldn't we? And then a few hours later, I was like, oh, yeah, you're right.
So, jumped in at an interesting point. He's kind of processing the complexity of the decision making around what do we do with our kid. Decision making makes me think of deciders, not necessarily single decider or double decider, just we're in the realm of decider like questions. He's kind of aware of the input from the doctors. He calls the doctors wonderful, like they're probably very helpful. They're really concerned and maybe empathetic about the fact that his kid's dying, but at the same time, they have their like specialty, their little silo of technique. That feels like a point for double deciding to me. Um, maybe not. There was some slowdown on the decision, so I'm kind of torn, but that's where my head's at so far. We are in the realm of deciding. My wife says this. I'm thinking that. The doctors are empathetic and they have their like limited domain of skill. So even in that, it's kind of like, okay, they were compassionate, but maybe I'm reading too much into what he's saying. Clearly I am because I've only watched a little bit, but yeah, so maybe double deciding, thinking and feeling in the middle. Not sure.
And then telling his brothers, his big brothers, 3 and 5, is our brother going to die? Yeah. Yes, he is.
So another very difficult thing to deal with, right? How do you tell these kids that their brother is going to die? Yes, he is. Something about that kind of response feels very straightforward and ST-like to me. At least in this presentation of that conversation, he didn't sugarcoat anything. He didn't try to convince them that there's some other realm of like fairy dust or whatever where, your brother will continue on. Not that that would be, not that that would be a horrible thing if he had done that, but yes, he is going to die. Like I say ST, I feel that there's also some sensing in that, in the sense of like, that is accurate. Yes, that is what is happening. Recall that sensing is a function that pertains to observation, information.
I mean, when you look back, do you are there any things that you think I wish I'd done that differently?
When you look back, what would you do differently if you could do it over again? Doing it over. knowing what you know now. I'm kind of torn between, again, I said that doing is kind of in the realm of deciding, but also there's a sense of like having information that you didn't have then, having either like actual sensory data or having like an intuitive realization, what would change? So this could be a really interesting answer.
Or is it all just learning and life and
Not before he died. No. I think the easiest thing to screw up would have been our relationships with each other, the people who weren't Henry. We could have neglected our other boys. We could have said, you know what, we'll be back in a few months or whatever. We'll dress you, feed you, but beyond that. And certainly to each other, my wife and I could have said, like, clearly we have this task in front of us that is immense. We don't need to focus on we don't need to divert any attention to each other. But of course, like anything, if you give your partner, a little bit of attention, they flourish, and it's the ultimate, you get in what you put out, and that is true or truer when you're under extreme duress. I don't know how we knew to do that, but we did. So
that's really interesting. I'm going to go back and kind of try to give that a second shot. Some things are starting to stand out to me from that.
A little bit of attention, they flourish, and it certainly to each other, my wife and I could have said, like, clearly we have this task in front of us that is immense. We don't need to focus on we don't need to divert any attention to each other.
So, what am I seeing in there? Like the mentioning of having a task. We could have said, hey, we have this thing to do. We really have to focus on this transition. Therefore, we don't need to focus on each other. We can put the relationship on the back burner. That is more, to me, that's kind of a logistical process. That's kind of a thinking laden process that he's describing there. I would say that that's like another point for thinking. We haven't heard a ton about the grief yet, and I feel like maybe as a thinker, he would put the brakes on the grief a little bit more. And it would be a big deal for him to come out and process his grief, and probably be a very motivational, exciting thing from the tribal perspective. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time, because I'm usually not the best at keeping these short. Also, maybe in terms of state changes, I want to think about what he meant by divert.
In front of us that is immense. We don't need to focus on we don't need to divert any attention to each other.
Divert. Some kind of finding the right word. I don't know if that's it. We don't need to divert, we need to be doing this, so we don't need to be doing that. I don't know if there's anything there. I think I probably will be overanalyzing it if I go any further.
But of course, like anything, if you give your partner, a little bit of attention, they flourish, and it's the ultimate, you get in what you put out, and that is true or truer when you're under extreme duress.
I think I saw a little state change in there.
Put out a little bit of attention, if you divert any attention to each other. But of course, like anything,
of course,
if you give
little smile on his face,
your partner,
if you give your partner
a little bit of attention,
they flourish. This sounds kind of like I'm thinking like TIFE axis. I've said recently in some comments and in some videos that I don't like to think about the axes all that much because I trip myself up. But to me, this does feel a little more on the TIFE. It's like, if you slow down your partner, your person, a little bit of attention, you attend to them, you focus on the tribe for just a second, then they flourish, you're kind of uplifting them. I don't know. Seems like a little weird around that. So I would think like TI with FE in the middle. Earlier I was saying double decider. I'm still kind of leaning that direction. Um, Partner, like a little slow down on talking about the partner and giving other people attention, even a little bit of attention. Okay, so
It's the ultimate, you get in what you put out, and that is true or truer when you're under extreme duress.
and that is true. That statement, that little statement, is very accurate for this situation, or even more accurate in times of duress.
I don't know how we knew to do that, but we did. So yeah, no regrets.
I mean, you said
I don't know how we need to do that. I'm obviously very biased now, but saying like I don't know how we knew that, like where it came from. Um, that seems to me slightly like a demon intuition comment. Like this concept has mysterious origins, and somehow we managed to do it anyway. I'm not gonna put all my money on that, but that's where my head's at right now.
you carried on sort of going on date nights.
Yeah.
How do you go on date nights when your child has cancer and you know they're going to die, and not talk about that all the time?
How do you do that? How do you go on these dates? It's not a question of like logistics or thinking, right? He's saying emotionally, how do you do that? How do you navigate that? I think this guy, Dave and Shan, have said at some point somewhere that he's Savior Effie, the interviewer here. And so maybe that's a very natural question for him to ask. So how do you navigate that, the emotionality around that?
Oh, we didn't not talk about it, because sometimes your partner might come home and be talking about work, and then we've all heard or done the thing where you're like, why don't we not talk about work?
Yeah.
But we wouldn't do that about Henry. But at the same time, we would try to, like, we would read the same books, or we would read aloud to each other, before we would go to bed. So we'd fall asleep reading the same book to each other after we'd gone through all our medical stuff and done the best we could with whatever and our plans for the next day. Then we would read something to each other. We read The Crimson Petal and the White by Michel Faber, and I know that he's retired because his last book he wrote, and he said he got a tremendous amount of help from his wife with all his writing, and but then he didn't want to write any more novels after she died, and I just
I feel like I'm letting this go on too long. I feel like what I'm seeing here, I'm seeing some, more reports on like what they're doing together in reality. We were reading a book together and we were doing X, Y, and Z. And yeah, so what am I really trying to say here? So there are things that are being decided, right? There's thinking and there's feeling kind of nestled here. But those little pieces of verbiage are kind of nestled within a greater whole of like, here is what happened. And I think both, intuitive DOMs and sensing DOMs as observers are concerned with what's happening. It's just where's the inflection. The sensors are more on the side of this is reality, what's happening in reality. Let me give you the details, what book we were reading, so on and so forth. And then the intuitives are kind of, they might give you that, but there's like slow down and there's like a bigger pattern. Now this guy is kind of giving me slow down in general, so I don't really know what to make of that. His like speech pattern is hard for me to wrap my head around, so this is all prone to being revised, but here we go.
I need to reach out to him somehow and say how much his writing, and often about his wife, directly or obliquely, helped my wife and I during a very difficult time. So, Michelle, if you're watching, thank you. If I can lure you out of retirement, let me know what it would take. But yeah, that was really nice reading to each other.
So this other guy in the tribe helped us to process our grief. Shout out to the guy. Hey, if you're watching, come out of retirement. So shout out to the guy. It's not quite the same as like the shout out that Megan Trainor gave to her therapist in my last video. It's a little sillier, like it doesn't feel as much his home base or his default state, like he's maybe coming out of his DI to acknowledge the tribe and bring this other person in. Maybe that also makes me think save your play, like not afraid to disrupt this interview here, to pull in a random tribe member, have a random anecdote or aside. So points for play, points for, I would say, DE third. Other person's helping you process your emotions, FE.
Because of course you're working all the way through this and hitting success that you haven't really experienced in the same way before.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Because I would be in a pediatric cancer ward, and I'd be with nurses who live outside of London and have to drive very far or tube very far to get to work because they understandably can't afford a flat near where they work. And then from there, I'd get picked up in a black sedan and taken to an awards show where there's literal billionaires. So for me, it was a very educational time because I saw people who were below the poverty line, who were working harder than I do, and doing incredibly important, beautiful stuff. And then
People who are working hard, doing important, beautiful stuff. That's just like, for me, that is kind of a paradigmatic exemplar moment of double deciding even at the micro scale. These people were working hard, doing important, beautiful stuff.
then I'd be with people, with like
Nestled again in the I'd be doing this, and then this other sensory data point, and then this other sensory data point.
inherited wealth who were like pretending to do whatever. And so it was maddening. And it really made me realize like these, or for example, cancer affected our family, but it affects lots of families. It doesn't discriminate as to whether you're rich or poor. And so maybe in the bed next to us, there's somebody who is poor and has that additional unbelievable stress. And so they're trying to figure out how to navigate the work that they must show up for and take care of their kid who's suffering or maybe dying. And they don't deserve that, just like the billionaire doesn't deserve
The work and the suffering and
stable full of
deserving.
horses. I
Oh,
mean,
that seems
first of all,
important.
and they don't deserve that, just like the billionaire doesn't deserve, the stable full of horses. I mean, first of all, we need a one horse maximum rule, I think, in this country. So I learned a lot about money and how it's used and not used.
First of all, we need a one horse maximum. A little bit of a jokey moment, right? Felt kind of channel changey, but then quickly, well, but then he got back on track. Is that like consume and blast balanced out, or what is that?
Used, and you realize like there are people in the country who wake up every morning and around 8:30 decide like that's a pretty good misery level for those folks. What do we need to do about it? Nothing. Again, sounds good, and sign off on it. So that really made me angry.
Do you think some of your rage went into politics?
So there he's kind of processing like the disparity between. Let me hear that again.
Again, sounds good. How it's used, and I think in this country. So I learned a lot about money and how it's used and not used. And, you realize like there are people in the country who wake up every morning and
Also, I haven't really pointed this out, but he keeps saying, like, you realize. I say keep saying, but he's said it a couple of times, and to me, that's maybe hinting at a little bit of demon intuition of like you're tracking what's happening so much, and then you kind of explode out of that framework to see the bigger overarching picture. So the notion of like realization, processing information that you didn't see before, kind of the hidden invisible seams, that is definitely more of an intuitive kind of headspace. But don't quote me on that.
around 8:30 decide like that's a pretty good misery level for those folks. What do we need to do about it? Nothing. Again, sounds good, and sign off on it. So that really made me angry.
So what's he processing there? He's processing that there are people in the world who are they have like a lot of resources and they're kind of a-holes, and they say, hey, like this level of misery in the world, that's totally fine by me. Not going to do anything to change it. Kind of the I don't know, selfish consumer or DI. Uh-oh. I don't know. I'm starting to contradict myself with my
Do you think some of your
analysis.
rage went into politics? Because while you, when I first wanted to interview you, you had, I think, spoken about Henry a little bit. What you've become very well known for is being politically, very straightforwardly out there about what you believe.
Yeah.
Joining protests, saying what you think on social media. Is that where you directed some of the rage, do you think, of Henry? Or
I don't know. Henry certainly heightened it, and focused my mind, because then the discrepancy between the things I was seeing sometimes in one 3-hour period was making me crazy. So
Discrepancy, yeah. So just like that swing of the information, you're in one reality and then suddenly you're in another reality, and I feel like that's kind of something that he's processing. At least I'm trying to make the case for that. That being an observer kind of processing problem.
So that sort of put a finer point on it. But like, even moving to the UK, and having had medical debt in the United States, despite being able-bodied and healthy, there was a time when I had tens of thousands of dollars worth of medical debt.
what does that mean? Sorry, what's his medical debt?
Oh, it's money that you are that you're in arrears, and
To a hospital.
Yeah, that collection agents are pursuing, because you signed a thing saying, yes, I'll find one way or another to get you your money, whether or not my insurance, or if I don't have insurance, covers it, guaranteeing that you'll pay them. So then coming over here and discovering the NHS, and I was bananas about the NHS before Henry even got sick. I mean, I remember signing up at the local GP and, like fumbling for a credit card, and they're like, what? We don't need that. And I was like, what? And, or
Here's
like
something that
even
happened, and
paying
then
the immigrant health surcharge.
here's something that happened, and then they said this, and I was like, I think that's also kind of indicative of that kind of breaking out into a realization. I feel like the mind blown kind of meme is sort of the savior sensing expansion that I was talking about before.
As part of our visas. I don't agree with that. However, it was so much less than a normal American annual premium that I was like, hell yeah.
This sensory was less than this sensory, and he's aware of those sensory points and how they compare. And I was like, hell yeah. And so that is kind of, I want to say that's kind of like a little demon feeling moment, like that kind of emotional expression, the hell yeah, just communicating purely emotively, but that's not his. He's not Megan Trainor. He's not doing this all the time, but it's something that he's dipping into. So I'm really starting to lock into like TIFE in the middle.
in certain devolved countries, you don't have to pay for prescriptions, but here, you pay $9 in England, and I'm like, $9, you got it, because I mean, it can be so expensive in the U.S. And so discovering the NHS was amazing.
So expensive, like again, kind of processing the observations. Not like so, like that's where he's really kind of like changing his state a little bit.
And then once Henry got sick, forget about it. I mean, the amount of time we would have spent on the phone begging for an MRI to get approved, or wondering why we'd gone to the pharmacy to get a certain medicine and they wouldn't give it to us. So we gained a lot of time merely by being in a country that had a national health service. My political involvement is just sort of like calling it like I see it. I'm not trying to do anything other than tell you what I've seen. I've said sometimes
Calling it like I see it, telling you what I've seen, that again to me is like a very ST kind of perspective of like, it is what it is, and also like, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense.
present myself as a ghost of Christmas future for British people regarding healthcare, because like I can show you what it could be like, and just want to let people know that the NHS is something to be defended with hammers and rakes and bricks if necessary.
But within that, obviously, you must know this from your own experience.
Maybe a little bit of slowdown on the analogy of being the ghost of Christmas future, slow down on analogy, demon intuition.
As a proportion of national wealth, we spend half of what America does.
I know.
It's a fraction, less than a lot of our European neighbors. And then we wonder why the NHS is struggling.
I know, exactly. Yeah, it's a funny thing because, and it's weird where it manifests, because the little things, flu jab, pretty easy to get, and any sort of your most basic interactions with the NHS, mine have been pretty good. Then, of course, with a brain tumor or anything genuinely catastrophic, most people I spoke to received tremendous care on a good timeline. But it's the stuff in the middle, like, hey, my knee, I'm 45 and my knee seems to be giving, then you could be waiting for a while. So diagnostic stuff, like sometimes the discovery of certain illnesses and stuff can take time in the UK. So I have a little bit, I can maybe see a little deeper into what it is and what it could be because of previous experience. So yeah, I think I might be of use in diagnosing or helping the NHS, improve some things, but it's rather not the NHS, but the government's treatment of the NHS, or their valuing, how they value it or don't, as the case may be.
I mean,
Okay, interesting. So, my experience, I could be of use. Use is a very thinking, it's kind of a thinking oriented word. I could help improve, I could solve this, I could make it better. Let's see. Okay, we're coming up on 30 minutes. Also, I was kind of thinking earlier maybe he was blast last, but now I'm kind of second guessing that and seeing that, maybe he's pretty good at kind of giving like little lessons and explaining what he knows, and is a little channel changey, but we'll get back on track. So yeah, I kind of mentioned him being balanced earlier in the communication and not getting too far off the track. So we'll see.
I'm sure there are a lot of people listening to this who are trying to picture your family scene and inevitably think that Henry is Sharon Horgan's son.
Right. Yeah.
And obviously, Leah is not Sharon Horgan, so your wife. So
Yeah.
talk about why you're here in the first place. Why are you
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I was over here doing stand up, and my manager said, "Hey, I got you a deal to write a pilot for the BBC." And I thought, little old me, I mean, I didn't even think to dare to ask that. So I said to my friend Sharon, "You want to write a pilot?" She said, "Sure." So we hammered out a pilot, had fun doing it, and we're pretty sure that's where it would stop. We gave it to the BBC, and they read it, and they said, "This is great. We don't want to make it." So we brought it to Channel 4, and Channel 4 said, "Yeah, sure, we'll shoot it." And we thought, well, isn't that fun? We get to shoot a little pilot, and that'll be that. I'll have learned a lot, and it'll be fun. I'll have gotten to work with Sharon Horgan. What a treat for me. And it'll stop there. but it didn't. It kept going. My wife took a leave of
All right, I'm going to
absence.
pause. So I'm going to let my cat in and then finish this out. All right, I thought I was going to watch a little bit more, but then I had some feline disruptive issues, so we'll just not include that piece of footage. But I guess I'm just going to go ahead and take a crack at typing him. So let's see, kind of as an overview here, I thought that maybe he was a double decider, so we'll just kind of reinforce that. A lot of talk that ends up talking about, what works, what is useful, but also what is important, what is beautiful. Even though he's talking about grief, and he is holding the grief at bay in this conversation, it's not at the forefront of what's being talked about. He's able to dip into it a little bit, and it's not the most overwhelming experience that it could be if this was a guy who was like an INTP who had never experienced, grief before and was suddenly hit with the tidal wave. So, saying double deciding, I do think maybe, more so on the ST side. I'm feeling like audio, maybe picking up on just like some specificity here and there. But then also like a very friendly guy, feminine D kind of guy. What else? I was thinking the TI, FE axis, a little bit of slow down when talking about like giving attention to your partner and how that makes all the difference. And, I mentioned, so I know a little bit about this guy, and I had seen another video about him talking about finding a grief group or like a, bereaved parents group. And, to me, that sounds very much like finding like a tribe, right? Something that would be kind of a big deal for somebody who's, say, your DI. Finding my tribe and finding a place where I can do that processing of emotions. And, don't worry, I've got the like thinking side of life down pat. I can do the logistics. I can figure out by myself or with my partner how to make things work, but I really need that space to do the emotional processing. So TIFE, demon intuition, I feel like is a little bit harder for me to prove. There was like an analogy in there that was a little odd. There were some discussions of having like mind-blowing realizations, a lot of play-by-play of what's happening in reality. So I see that as being savior sensing, play above sleep. He did see the bad guys as being selfish, but that didn't feel as charged as it could, so I'm sort of stuck on that one. Like I said, I think it's probably DE third. So yeah, TI as a savior. He did say little old me at one point, and I think that's a point for double deciding, because he's kind of like putting himself down, but then at the same time, he's presenting himself as a person. Like he is the guy who can help this governmental organization figure things out, as if they don't have like a bunch of intellectually capable people working for them. That's a little odd to me. I mean, I think the same way. I'm often like, I am the guy who's going to fix this problem, and clearly I know better than this entire room of people. So, that's kind of funny. Yeah, okay, so let's try to like do a little bit of whittling here. So, maybe one of these guys or one of these guys if we're just talking about ST double deciders. Oh, where's the SI there? You guys, you don't need to see me fix my BS. Okay, well, if I'm going to go all in on saying TIFE, then I don't need to highlight these guys, right? Yeah, there's no ST that isn't T on this side. So, if I then went a little bit further, I thought I saw some play above sleep, and also like the general slowness of his speech is something that I personally relate to, and I think of that as being related to sleep last, although sleep last can also manifest in kind of high energy. But when you're talking about like the known information about your life and trying to keep on track, that can be difficult for people who are sleep last and blast lower. Um, I think I'm a little inclined to see him as being in here. And what else? Yeah, like I said, hmm, yeah, this makes sense. I didn't see a lot for like Savior Consume versus Savior Blast, but if it's not Blast Last, then that would make him this particular ESTP. I'd also, maybe I'd consider one of these guys. But if I had to put my money on it, yeah, I would say CTI Consume Play Blast Sleep. I feel like I didn't do a great job of justifying myself this time around. Again, I'm running long despite my efforts, but I had fun doing this. Yeah, I feel like I was not like fully with it, and there was something that was hard for me to translate with watching this, guys. So I'm trying to conceptualize typing as being about, you know, taking what's being said and then kind of translating it into OPS terms. Is this a decision? Is this a logical argument, a statement of what's appropriate? Is this a realization and encapsulating observation? Is it a factual happening? Um, I'm trying to get better at like translating and then looking at the state to see whether that's like a savior or a demon. But I think that attention is very important whenever you're attempting to type someone, and kind of leveraging your attention and making sure that you're not missing anything. And I don't think that I brought my full attention to typing Rob Delaney, but in any case, I did. I gave it my best shot, so we'll see how I did. I will tune in for part 2 coming up soon. Bye bye. Hi everyone, I'm Jeffrey, back at it with part 2 of my Rob Delaney video. I'm going to jump right into it. So I ended up typing him as audio, MF, ESTP, consume, play, blast, sleep, and Dave and Shan ended up typing him as audio, NETI, consume, play, sleep, blast. So ESTP versus ENTP. I'm feeling pretty good about this guess, even though I missed 2 pieces. So I missed the sensing versus intuition coin, and I missed info versus energy, which ended up being the distinction between blast last and sleep last. The second part there, blast last, I don't feel too bad about because I actually had considered it and left this ESTP on the board as one of my options. I talked about the possibility of him being blast last in my part 1 video, and after watching some more footage of him, I'm definitely seeing more signs of blast last. I think it can be difficult to conceptualize what that really looks like in action, but one way of thinking of it is that blast is kind of a communication-oriented animal. There's more to it than that, but generally speaking, if you are tracking other people and you're trying to stay on track with a particular piece of organized narrowed information, then even if you get kind of rambly, even if you get a little chaotic with your communication, you will, to some extent or another, stick the landing. You will understand that closure is necessary. See what I just did there? I got a little chaotic, I got a little rambly, but I managed to compress everything that I was saying into a package for my audience here. Not that I'll always do it, but it's something that is kind of natural for me. I'm always aware that I need to start to wrap it up, make it digestible. Now, if you are save your consume, you're gonna have, and save your play actually, you're gonna have this messy jumble of information pinging through your brain. So if you are blast last, it's going to be just, I think, much more perceptible when you don't manage to stick the landing. And so save your consume, blast last, that's going to be a big problem for that particular type. Now I'm losing it. A problem is going to be sticking the landing. That's ultimately what I want to communicate here. So I see with Rob, after watching more footage of him, a lot of examples of him not sticking the landing. And so here's just one example of what that might look like so that you know in the future what you could be looking for.
Like I remember coming into the kitchen and looking out the back window and seeing in the garden that same boy stabbing with a kitchen knife a cardboard box from like a package that he had written the word tumor on it and like not spelled it correctly, but was just stabbing a box that said tumor on it. And normally you would like go take a kitchen knife away from your young child, but I was like, good work, son. That's adults should do stuff like that because we try to stumble through and act like we're all right.
Here you are.
So this story is about processing the grief of his baby that died and how his other kids were processing that grief. And so you got one son who's just stabbing, really externalizing, symbolically working through the grief. And, Colbert thought that the story was over, It kind of reached a natural conclusion. It seemed like it was over, and then Rob just kind of keeps rambling, keeps sputtering. It's kind of the bird chirp talk that Dave and Shan talk about. So in this case, people who are blast last often, the people around them will have to take responsibility for moving things along, wrapping up that segment, moving on to the next piece of the conversation. So that's what happened there. I saw it a lot when I started to rewatch some footage of him beyond the footage that I already had. So what else? I do feel like sensing versus intuition was tough for me with Rob. And I think a big reason for that is this whole idea of savior state versus demon state. A lot of these, or I guess the video that I watched, the entirety of that content was about processing the grief of his son dying. And so he's already in a state that, if he's an ENTP especially, that is an unnatural state to be in, to be processing this grief, sharing your emotions with other people. And so I mentioned in my first part of the video that he seemed to be kind of slow in general. There was a slowdown in what he was saying and what he was processing. And I think that ultimately is indicative of him being in a demon state, for the duration of the video, which makes it hard to read the signals and hard to know, what's normal, what's up, what's down, what's savior, what's demon. So with that being said, I saw a lot of him talking about, the facts and what happened, and he was very slow and very delicate. Interestingly, if I were someone to think in terms of the axes, I might say, oh, he's trying to lay out in SI the chronological linear ordering of what happened to him, the real facts of what happened to him. So I don't normally look to things like that, but that could have been helpful in this case. The other thing to say about that, so he was slow in general, but then there were times when he would kind of like crack a joke. This is a guy who's a comedian, and I think I should have taken those moments more seriously. I kind of wrote them off as, oh, look, he said something that's like a little awkward because he's processing grief, but now he's making this joke and using this analogy and leaving the planet. And whatever, like, I think I was locked into seeing him as an ST type, and so I got a little stuck and started to buy into my own BS a little bit. So I wish I had the examples pulled up. That's on me. Being an ENTP, I'm not going to have my examples pulled up. But I had pointed a lot to him, like, coming to realizations as being indicative of demon intuition. But rewatching, and if you go back to that first part of the video, he is kind of just like calmly talking through it. And then we realized this, and we didn't realize that. And it seemed like the thing that he was really processing was some of the factual disparities and literally what happened. He talked about the disparity between, being a comedian and working on a TV show and then going to a hospital and seeing, this is my kid, and then here are all these kids who they have parents who don't have any resources, and this is like the ugly reality. So that's different than processing like a realization, an intuitive clicking together. He's instead he's processing like the ugly facts. That's the best way that I can think of it. I saw that general slowdown, but then speeding up on like I want to come to America and say, hey, like healthcare can be so much better. I want to be the ghost of Christmas future for healthcare in America. Like that's an interesting analogy. That's a little out there when he was talking about people who are wealthy and having people who have a lot of horses. He said we need a one horse maximum in this country. That's also like an intuitive leap, an intuitive stretch, a channel change in the realm of intuition. So, you know, because he's like jumping to this idea of, we need like a cap on income, or we need, and then he's like jokingly turning it into we need a one horse maximum. So horse is like indicative of, symbolic of wealth, and he's playing around with that concept. So yeah, in general, I think I was like wrong to see. I was right to see that he was processing, the observations and what's happening and what's missing and what's not. I was wrong in my reading of like the slowdown versus what's speeding up, and really just contextualizing it within this being a rather demon state processing chapter or episode from his life. And even though it's, a low chapter for him, there's still times when his like natural comedic intuitive side like pokes through and shines. And so I just didn't do the right kind of interpreting with that. But I, now I'm kind of losing it. Now I'm kind of trailing off. So this is why I thought I was blast last. Okay, one other thing I'll say is that I noticed that there was some point in the video where he's talking about like, it's so weird that, we die and we're born into this human body. And it felt a little bit like like my video with Megan Trainor, where she talks about the weirdness of having a body, and she has a weird state change around that. So I saw like this strange kind of like intuitive. It's like weird to be in a corporeal form and have material existence. So that's another point for intuition. So in any case, yeah, not too shabby overall. So I'll leave it at that. I've already gone on way too long. Godspeed to you all, and have a good night or good day wherever you are in the world. And now Stephen Colbert can come in and make sure that I wrap this up appropriately, because who knows when I'm going to wrap it up.